Hi, my name is Amelia, and for most of my life, I felt invisible in my own home. My parents didn't treat me like a daughter, they treated me like their maid. I remember mornings when I'd wake up before the sun, brewing coffee, ironing clothes, and making breakfast while my younger brother lounged in bed. Amelia, bring this, Amelia, clean that. Their voices were never gentle, just commands, sharp and cold. I used to hope it was a phase, that maybe one day, they'd see me as a person, not just a servant. But that day never came. I grew up in a big house in the suburbs of Chicago, the kind that looks perfect from the outside, manicured lawns, expensive cars in the driveway, but inside, it was a battlefield. My father, Richard, was a high-powered executive who spent most of his life climbing the corporate ladder. My mother, Vanessa, was obsessed with appearances, social status, and proving to the world that she had it all together. Neither of them had time for me. My brother, Ethan, was their golden child. He could do no wrong. Every award he got, every compliment, every little success, they celebrated him as if he were their crown jewel. Me? I was just the invisible girl who cleaned the mess they made. I remember one particularly humiliating moment from my teenage years. I had spent hours preparing my father's favorite breakfast, perfect scrambled eggs, crispy bacon, fresh orange juice, but when I handed him the plate, he barely looked up from his phone. "Amelia, why is this cold?" he snapped. My mother rolled her eyes and muttered, "Honestly, you're so careless." My heart sank. I went to school that day wearing the same quiet anger I carried every morning, wishing I could disappear. But there was one thing I had that they didn't know about: drive. Quiet, burning drive. I was smart, resourceful, and I knew that one day, I wouldn't be their servant forever. I would have control, power, and respect, but not by begging for it. No, I'd earn it the hard way. High school was rough, but I was determined. I kept my grades high, worked odd jobs to save money, and learned everything I could about business and finance. My parents thought I was wasting my time, they even mocked my ambition. "Why do you want to work so hard? Just marry well and live comfortably," my mother sneered one night while flipping through a magazine. But I knew I wanted more. I wanted to prove them wrong. The real turning point came during my college years. I landed an internship at a mid-sized consulting firm in Chicago. My parents acted like it was nothing. But inside, I was thrilled. For the first time in my life, I felt seen, by strangers, yes, but it was better than the cold indifference at home. I worked late nights, absorbed every lesson, and gradually started earning a reputation for being meticulous, intelligent, and dependable. Then came the day that changed everything. I was assigned to assist a visiting CEO, Mr. Jonathan Hayes, who was evaluating potential partnerships with our firm. Tall, confident, and intimidating, but he didn't treat me like a maid. In fact, the moment I introduced myself, he smiled warmly and said, "Amelia, I've heard great things about you. I'm looking forward to working with you." Just those two words, great things, hit me like lightning. For once, I wasn't invisible. For once, someone called me a boss in a way that made me feel like I actually was one. The weeks that followed were surreal. Mr. Hayes trusted me with sensitive documents, asked for my input in meetings, and even laughed at my jokes, real laughter, not polite chuckles. I realized then that the world outside my toxic home had rules that made sense, where merit mattered, not birth order or favoritism. I thrived under his mentorship, soaking up everything I could. Meanwhile, back home, nothing had changed. My parents continued to treat me like a servant. My father still barked orders, my mother still criticized, and Ethan still strutted around like a king in a castle that wasn't really his. I would come home late, exhausted from work, only to be met with a mountain of chores. "Amelia, can you wash the dishes? And don't forget the laundry," they'd call from the kitchen. And I'd bite my tongue, because I had a bigger goal, a plan forming quietly in my mind. One day, they'd see me as the boss, not just Mr. Hayes, but everyone. College ended, and I moved into a small apartment downtown. I was free from their daily cruelty, but the psychological scars remained. Every insult, every command, every dismissive glance had chipped away at my self-worth over the years. But I had learned to armor myself with ambition and intellect. Slowly, methodically, I built my career, climbing rung by rung until I finally landed a managerial position in a prestigious consulting firm. Then, a golden opportunity presented itself. Mr. Hayes, the CEO who had once called me a boss, invited me to a private business conference. He remembered my diligence and insight and now wanted me to lead a key project, representing the firm at a high-profile meeting. My heart raced, not just because of the career leap, but because I realized that moment was more than professional validation. It was the first step in my silent rebellion against my parents' cruelty. I walked into that conference, impeccably dressed, notes in hand, confidence radiating, and when Mr. Hayes introduced me to the board, he said, "Amelia, take it away. The floor is yours." Just like that, I stood there, not as a servant, not as the invisible daughter, but as a woman commanding the room. And the word "a boss" had never felt sweeter. Looking back, I sometimes think that if my parents had treated me with love and respect, I might have never had the fire that burned in me. But they did, and it did. Every snide comment, every unfair expectation, every humiliating moment, they had unknowingly forged a weapon. And that weapon was me, smart, determined, and hungry for recognition, not just from the world, but from the people who had dismissed me for so long. Little did they know, the Amelia who had once bowed to every command was gone. In her place was someone who planned carefully, executed flawlessly, and thrived on strategic brilliance. And when the time came for the ultimate reveal, for the world to see who the real boss was, I would be ready. But first, I had to play my part. I had to keep smiling, keep appearing submissive, keep letting them think they were in control. Because the sweetest revenge is the one they never see coming. For years, I had believed that my parents' coldness was just their nature, that they didn't know how to love, didn't know how to treat me fairly. But what I discovered that night shattered every assumption I'd ever made. And it wasn't just coldness. It was betrayal. It started innocently enough, or at least, it seemed innocent at first. I had returned home one Friday evening after a long week, my heels clicking against the polished hardwood floors. My parents were hosting one of their infamous dinner parties. These parties were always about appearances, rich friends, shallow conversations, and a silent competition about who could show off more. I hated them, but I had learned to endure. I carried a tray of wine into the dining room, and that's when I noticed something strange. My father's usual composure was gone. He was leaning close to a woman I didn't recognize, whispering in a way that made me freeze mid-step. My mother, who usually dominated the room with her sharp words and polished smile, seemed nervous. There was tension I had never seen before, like a storm about to break. Curiosity and a flicker of dread pushed me closer. And then I overheard the words that hit me like a punch to the gut. "She won't find out, as long as we keep everything perfect on the outside." My blood ran cold. I realized instantly, they weren't just hiding something trivial. There was deception, something deliberate, something that had been going on behind my back. My father's hand brushed my mother's arm in a way that didn't belong to a healthy marriage. And the woman, she wasn't a guest. She was someone else, someone my father had been secretly seeing for months, maybe years. I retreated silently, my mind racing. Betrayal wasn't new to me in small doses. I had lived with my parents' favoritism and emotional cruelty, but this was a betrayal of a different kind. This was a secret that undermined everything I thought I knew about family loyalty, trust, and morality. That night, I barely slept. My anger simmered, but so did a cold, calculating thought. I couldn't confront them yet. I needed proof. I needed every detail. And most importantly, I needed to plan my next moves carefully. If I acted rashly, I could ruin any leverage I had over them. Over the next few weeks, I became a shadow in my own home. I pretended nothing was wrong, smiling politely, doing my chores, while secretly watching and listening. I noticed little things, late-night texts on my father's phone, hushed phone calls my mother took in the kitchen, the way my brother sometimes looked confused and excluded, sensing tension but not understanding it. Then one evening, I found the smoking gun. My father had left his laptop open while he stepped out for a call. Heart pounding, I moved closer and saw the emails, the messages, the incriminating evidence of lies. He had been funneling company funds to someone else's accounts, lying about work trips, and covering up his affair. My mother wasn't innocent either. She had been complicit in some ways, carefully curating her social image while silently enabling his deceit. I felt my chest tighten with rage, but also clarity. This was the moment I had been waiting for, though I hadn't known it yet. I realized that their cruelty toward me wasn't just about favoritism or control. It was about power. They thrived on having people beneath them, on controlling the narrative. And for years, I had played by their rules, obeying and surviving. But now, I had the tools to turn the tables. I started documenting everything: emails, receipts, messages. Every lie, every betrayal, every single manipulation went into a secret folder I labeled Amelia's Plan on my encrypted drive. I even began keeping a journal, writing down the conversations I overheard, the moments of hypocrisy, the subtle ways they flaunted their cruelty. It was painstaking, but it was also strangely empowering. One night, my father came home late, clearly under the influence. My mother, ever the social actress, greeted him with her perfect smile. I sat in the living room pretending to read, but I caught snippets of their conversation. "She's getting too smart," my father said, a hint of worry in his tone. "I don't know if we can keep her under control forever." I froze. Did he mean me? Did he see that I wasn't just the obedient daughter anymore? "Don't worry," my mother replied smoothly. "She won't know anything. She's still too caught up in her little career to notice what we're doing." I clenched my fists so hard that my nails dug into my palms. Too caught up? They thought I was oblivious? They had no idea what I had seen, what I knew, or what I was capable of. From that night on, everything changed. I started to play a dangerous game. I maintained my polite, submissive persona at home while secretly gathering more information and building alliances outside of it. I began talking to people at my father's company under the guise of professional curiosity, subtly probing for details that confirmed his misdeeds. I also reconnected with old colleagues from my internship days, people who admired my intelligence and who could be useful later. But the betrayal cut deeper than just my father's affair or the lies. My mother's passive complicity, the way she silently encouraged his deception to maintain her social image, stung more than anything. I had believed for years that a mother's love was supposed to be protective, nurturing, and unconditional. My mother's love had been conditional, transactional, and shallow. That realization fueled a fire in me that was both terrifying and intoxicating. Then came the moment that truly pushed me over the edge. I found out that my father had been planning to cut me out of the family inheritance entirely, funneling everything to Ethan. I had always known I wasn't their favorite, but this was deliberate, strategic, and cruel. They had treated me like a maid, insulted me, and then planned to erase my financial future as well. I remember sitting on my bedroom floor that night, staring at the ceiling, shaking with a mix of rage, grief, and exhilaration. I had been underestimated my entire life. I had been mocked, ignored, and mistreated. And now, finally, I had the truth. I had the ammunition. It was at that moment I whispered to myself. They think they're the boss. They think they're untouchable. But they've never met me when I'm ready. From that night forward, my life took on a singular focus. Every interaction at home became strategic. Every smile, every polite gesture, every quiet obedience was a mask. I was planning, not just to expose them, but to make them feel the consequences of their cruelty in ways they could never ignore. And the best part? They had no idea that the girl they treated like a servant, the invisible daughter, the so-called maid of their house, was becoming the most dangerous person in their carefully curated world. After discovering my father's affair and my mother's complicity, I felt like I was drowning in a storm I had never seen coming. At first, I was consumed by anger, the kind of pure, hot rage that makes your chest tighten and your hands shake. But anger alone wouldn't be enough. I realized that revenge wasn't just about confronting them or exposing their secrets. Revenge was about control, strategy, and timing. It was about making them feel, in the deepest, most personal way, what it meant to betray someone who trusted them completely. I spent nights pacing my apartment, scribbling plans in notebooks, jotting down ideas that seemed too crazy to work but felt satisfying just to write. Each plan had to be foolproof. There was no room for mistakes. One misstep, and my parents would laugh at me, just as they had for years. The first step was mental. I had to process the betrayal without letting it cloud my judgment. I allowed myself a few nights of pure emotion, crying, screaming into my pillow, feeling every ounce of betrayal and humiliation. But then, like flipping a switch, I forced myself to focus. The tears didn't help me, the plan did. And the plan was already forming. I began by gathering allies, though carefully. I reached out to former colleagues who knew my capabilities and could discreetly provide information about my father's business dealings. I connected with financial consultants and legal advisors under the guise of career networking. Everything was professional, everything was innocent-looking, yet every connection was a piece of my ultimate strategy. At home, I became the perfect daughter again, the one who cleaned, cooked, smiled politely, and never challenged their authority. They had no reason to suspect that the quiet, compliant Amelia of the house was the same Amelia who was plotting a meticulously crafted, multi-layered revenge. But revenge isn't just strategic, it's emotional, too. And for me, it came in waves. Some days, I felt exhilarated by my growing knowledge of their secrets and my slowly building power. Other days, the betrayal hurt so deeply that I wanted to confront them on the spot, to scream, to break everything. I knew I couldn't, at least, not yet. Patience would be my deadliest weapon. I also started observing my parents more closely. I watched their routines, their weaknesses, the subtle ways they sought validation from others. My father, for example, thrived on appearing powerful and untouchable. Flattery worked like a drug on him. My mother, on the other hand, was obsessed with social image. She feared scandal above all else. These weaknesses became the pillars of my plan. I would exploit them mercilessly. Then, there was my brother, Ethan. He had always been blissfully unaware of the depth of my suffering. But I realized he could be useful, not because he was smart, but because he was naive. I began planting subtle hints and observations, carefully shaping him as a pawn without him even realizing it. He would become a part of my plan, whether he knew it or not. One night, I sat at my desk, reviewing all the evidence I had collected: emails, receipts, financial documents, photos, and messages. I organized everything into categories: betrayal, lies, manipulation, and weakness. Each item was a weapon. Each secret was a key to breaking their empire of false perfection. The more I cataloged, the more powerful I felt. I also started fantasizing about the ways I could execute my revenge. Some ideas were direct: exposing the affair publicly, ruining reputations, leveraging legal action. Others were subtle: psychological manipulation, letting them realize the extent of their betrayal slowly, like a creeping poison. I wanted them to feel the helplessness and shock that I had felt for years. But the most important part of planning revenge is knowing yourself. I had to ensure that I wouldn't lose myself in the process. I made a promise to myself: no matter what happened, I would remain composed, strategic, and in control. My parents had thrived on chaos and fear. I would thrive on calm and precision. During this period, I also reflected on my childhood and adolescence, dissecting every insult, every command, every moment of cruelty. I realized that their behavior wasn't just about me, it was about their own insecurities and thirst for control. This understanding didn't soften my anger, it sharpened it. I wanted them to see the true cost of underestimating someone they treated like nothing. I began experimenting with small moves at home. I would drop subtle comments about my professional achievements, hint at connections and knowledge they didn't realize I had, all while maintaining my facade of dutiful obedience. My parents noticed these changes, but they dismissed them. They thought I was finally growing into a competent adult who could manage my own career. Little did they know, I was sowing seeds of tension and doubt, preparing them for the ultimate shock. There were nights when I imagined the perfect confrontation. I saw my father's smug expression crumble when his secrets were revealed. I pictured my mother's carefully maintained social image collapsing in front of her friends. I visualized Ethan's confusion turning into awe and fear. These mental rehearsals fueled my obsession and kept me focused on the endgame. Yet, I also had moments of vulnerability. I asked myself, am I becoming too consumed by revenge? Will I lose myself in this pursuit? And each time, the answer came back clear: not yet. Revenge is not about destruction alone, it's about justice, about reclaiming what they took from me: my dignity, my recognition, my power. Finally, I drew up a multi-stage plan. It was intricate, precise, and ruthless. Gathering evidence, secure irrefutable proof of my father's affair, financial misdeeds, and my mother's complicity. Allies in place, recruit professional and personal connections who could help amplify the impact when the time came. Psychological manipulation, slowly create doubt, tension, and paranoia in their lives without them realizing it. Public exposure, reveal the affair and financial deception in a way that would shatter their social standing. Ultimate reversal, position myself as the one in control, financially, socially, and emotionally, while they struggle to comprehend how the MAID became the boss. I knew it wouldn't be easy. I knew there would be moments when I'd question myself, when fear would creep in. But I also knew one undeniable truth: they had underestimated me my entire life. And underestimation is a weapon in its own right. The days that followed were a delicate balance. I continued working diligently at my job, impressing superiors, networking strategically, and strengthening my professional influence. At home, I smiled, cooked, cleaned, and endured. My parents, still blinded by arrogance, had no idea that the quiet Amelia they thought they controlled was quietly orchestrating their downfall. Every day, I repeated my mantra. They think they're untouchable. They think they're the boss. But the boss has been right under their nose all along. The day finally came when all the planning, the waiting, the strategic patience, began to pay off. By now, I had everything in place, the evidence, the allies, the leverage, and most importantly, the timing. Revenge isn't just about acting, it's about choosing the perfect moment. And that moment was now. I started small. Subtle nudges, psychological manipulations that made my parents uneasy without them realizing why. My father, always confident and self-assured, began to second-guess himself. I would casually mention in conversation things I shouldn't have known, like financial decisions or business trips he claimed were confidential. "So, how's the new Chicago project going?" I asked one evening while clearing the dinner table. His eyes flickered, almost imperceptibly, but I caught it. Fine. "Everything's fine," he said, a little too quickly. "You know, I read an article about embezzlement risks in consulting firms. Some high-level people got caught transferring funds to personal accounts," I added casually, sipping my wine. My father stiffened. "Amelia, you shouldn't be reading such things." "It's complicated," he mumbled. Bingo. I had planted the seed of paranoia. It was subtle, but the ripple effect was immediate. My father started checking emails obsessively, double-checking every financial statement, and questioning his own staff, all because I had whispered a carefully crafted hint. Next came my mother. Her obsession with appearances was her weakness. I began inviting social contacts over for small, casual gatherings, subtly steering conversations toward integrity, betrayal, and trust in families. I noticed the way her hands would tremble slightly when these topics came up. She laughed politely, but the tension in her jaw betrayed her. Even my brother, Ethan, was caught in the web. I casually praised my own professional achievements in front of him, just enough to plant envy and admiration. He started noticing the difference between my competence and his parents' blind favoritism. He had been oblivious for years, but now, little cracks were appearing in his perception of our family dynamics. Once I had destabilized them emotionally, it was time to strike publicly. The first move was exposing the affair. I had gathered months of proof, emails, photos, messages, even witness statements. I chose the family's upcoming gala, a glittering, high-profile event, as the stage. The night of the gala, I arrived dressed impeccably, radiant, confident. My parents, unaware of my intentions, were preoccupied with socializing and showing off. I waited until the room was full, then approached one of the hosts, a mutual friend who I knew had influence in social circles. I handed them a copy of my evidence. "Take a look," I said softly. "I think people should know the truth." Moments later, the room shifted. Whispers started. Guests glanced at my parents with new eyes, subtle judgment in their expressions. My father's confident demeanor faltered. My mother's forced smile trembled. By the time I walked past them, I could see the cracks forming in their composure. But public exposure alone wasn't enough. I needed financial leverage too. I contacted the legal team I had quietly built connections with over the past months. Within weeks, they uncovered discrepancies in my father's accounts, confirming embezzlement and misappropriation. I didn't have to confront him directly, the law would do it. And it did. Letters arrived at our home, each more threatening than the last. My father's panic was palpable. He began calling frantic meetings, trying to salvage his reputation and finances. While the financial and social attacks unfolded, I also orchestrated psychological revenge at home. I had learned from years of observation how to push buttons without being caught. I would leave notes that weren't signed but hinted at knowledge of secrets. I moved small objects to suggest someone had been watching. I sent anonymous messages that made them question every action, every choice. One evening, my father confronted me in the kitchen. "Amelia, what is happening?" he demanded, voice trembling slightly. I smiled calmly, perfectly composed. "I think you already know, Dad," I said, placing a glass of water on the counter. "Maybe it's time to face the consequences of your actions." His jaw tightened. He didn't realize that I had orchestrated the perfect storm: public shame, financial disaster, and private psychological torment, all in tandem. Meanwhile, my mother's social network began to crumble. Invitations to elite events were rescinded quietly. Friends who once praised her poise whispered privately about her family's scandals. I watched her composure falter, the carefully maintained mask cracking under the pressure I had unleashed. Ethan, too, started to see the truth. One night, he confronted me quietly in the hallway. "Amelia." I had no idea. "They lied about everything," he whispered, eyes wide. "I know," I said softly. "But now you see what I've known all along. And maybe, now, you'll understand why I had to do this." The final, most satisfying part of my plan was the ultimate reversal: taking control of the family's finances and social standing. I positioned myself as the mediator, the one with knowledge, strategy, and credibility. Banks and advisors, who had once ignored me in my parents' shadow, now sought my input. Friends and acquaintances looked to me for guidance, unaware that I had been the invisible daughter all along. By the time the dust settled, my parents were broken. My father faced legal scrutiny and financial ruin. My mother's social image was shattered. Ethan, finally awake to the truth, looked at me not with envy but with respect. And me? I stood tall, confident, and in control. I had done it. Every insult, every command, every humiliating moment from my childhood had fueled this victory. And as I looked back, I realized the most powerful part of revenge isn't just in destroying someone, it's in rising above them, taking what they tried to deny you, and becoming the boss in every sense of the word. And for the first time in my life, I felt completely untouchable. The storm had passed. My parents' empire of control, lies, and appearances lay in ruins. My father faced legal investigations, financial penalties, and public humiliation. My mother's social world had crumbled quietly, her friends and acquaintances keeping their distance now that her carefully curated facade had shattered. Ethan, my brother, was finally seeing reality for the first time, not through the lens of favoritism and blind loyalty, but through truth. And me? I had risen from years of being invisible, mistreated, and underestimated to a place where I was not just acknowledged, but respected, feared even, in ways my parents never could have imagined. I had become the boss, not just in the corporate sense, but in life. I had mastered the art of turning weakness into strength, humiliation into power, and invisibility into influence. Yet, even in victory, there was reflection. Revenge, I realized, isn't a single act. It's a process that transforms you, reshapes your identity, and forces you to confront the darkness inside yourself. I had been consumed by anger and betrayal for years, but carefully channeled, that same fire had carved a path to my liberation. I didn't gloat. I didn't celebrate their downfall with malice. Instead, I observed quietly, letting the consequences of their actions unfold naturally. Karma, in its own subtle way, had delivered justice far more satisfying than I could have staged. And I learned something profound: the most powerful revenge isn't humiliation, it's rising above, claiming your own dignity, and taking control of your life. Ethan approached me one evening, nervously but sincerely. "Amelia, I just want to say, I get it now. I see what you went through, and I'm proud of you." For the first time, I felt a sense of closure. My brother's words weren't just validation, they were acknowledgement of years of suffering, of being overlooked, and of fighting silently. I smiled, feeling the weight of years lift from my shoulders. I also realized that forgiveness, or at least emotional release, was necessary. Revenge may have delivered justice, but it could not erase the scars of the past. I chose to forgive, not for their sake, but for mine. I let go of the anger that had once consumed me, knowing that my victory was proof that I no longer needed it to survive. In the months that followed, I focused on building a life where respect, recognition, and integrity mattered. I thrived in my career, strengthened relationships with people who valued me, and even began mentoring young professionals, teaching them to harness their own potential, to turn adversity into fuel for success. Looking back now, I can see the full arc of my journey. From a girl treated like a maid, invisible and undervalued, to a woman who commanded respect, influence, and power, the transformation wasn't just external. It was internal. I had become resilient, strategic, and unapologetically strong. I had learned that life may hand you betrayal, cruelty, and injustice, but those challenges are also the raw materials for building your own empire. The lesson I carry with me is simple but profound: never underestimate someone who has been pushed to the edge. Never dismiss the quiet, observant, underestimated person. And never confuse silence with weakness. I am Amelia, and I am the boss, not because someone handed me power, but because I took it, earned it, and owned it. And if my parents learned anything from all of this, I hope it was this: the person you mistreat today may very well be the one who shapes your world tomorrow.